Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the channel. Happy Saturday, everybody. I hope your day and your holiday week are going very well so far. College football week 14 rivalry week is officially here, and I have a ton of great picks to go ahead and share with you guys. But first, as always, people, please make sure to go ahead and hit the subscribe button, hit that like button, and drop a comment down below. It helps the channel grow, and it really does mean a ton to us. With a new day and a new week comes some new opportunities to go ahead and make some money. I have a whopping, you're not going to believe this, 16 picks to go and share with you guys in this week's college football slate. I got really hyped up for rivalry week. I love the board this week. There's so many great games, so many great options, so much great value on all of these games. So yeah, did I go a little overboard with all the picks? Yeah, maybe 16 picks is too many, but you know what? I want to give you guys a ton of options. If maybe somebody wants to bet on a random game and no one else is putting bets down for that one, you have my video to turn to. So we have 16 picks, one pick for 16 different games. We are taking it all in, guys. This is the final week of the college football regular season. So we're just trying to take it all in. It's crazy that the season's already at this point where the regular season's all but done. Crazy how time flies. However, guys, we still have a ton of college football left in the season. We still have conference championship, bowls, college football playoff, which is going to be a lot of fun. So guys, please, if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. We still have a ton of college football videos to do the rest of the way. I do want to apologize. The video obviously coming out a little later on Saturday morning. I wish I could have gotten a little earlier, but obviously with Thanksgiving and on the holiday and traveling and also having a pizza shop on Black Friday, a lot of craziness. So I'm sorry this video's coming out a little later, but we do get at least out a little bit later, but better late than never. And before I ramble on too much, I just want to go ahead and say, because we're getting this out a little late on Saturday and we have so many picks, I'm not going to be spending as much time on each pick. Now, some people might be jumping for joy because some people like to say I talk too much, which they're absolutely right. But I will be spending a little bit less time. So, you know, maybe 2 minutes or less on the picks so we can get through all 16 picks and not have this video be an hour and a half long. Also, don't worry, guys. All the plays for today's video will be down below in the pinned comment. And one last thing, guys, one final thing before we finally get into all of our picks for today's video. A quick little recap of how we did last week. And overall, not bad, not great. We went 5-5 last week, had a pretty slow start. Ole Miss game, we were completely off the mark on that one. However, we did recover pretty nicely in the later slate with Notre Dame, Alabama, Oklahoma, and the USC spread. So we had a pretty good recovery there after kind of a rough start to our Week 13 slate. We went 5-5 overall. We're now 65-72-3. I'm telling you guys, we will get over 500 before the end of the year. That's my guarantee to you guys. We still have plenty of time to go and turn that record around. 65-72-3, although it's not great. Not the worst record you've seen on YouTube, I'm sure. All right, guys, I've done enough yapping. Let's get to this week's picks. All right, guys, our first of 16 picks in this Week 14 rivalry slate. We've got Tennessee at Vanderbilt. I'm going with the Volunteers here, -10. This is obviously a very big spot for the Volunteers here. College football playoff stuff hanging in the balance. A win for Tennessee, and I think they're probably safe to at least make it into the college football playoff, whatever their seed will be. I think a win against Vanderbilt should get them in that top 12. But there's some pressure. Vanderbilt has played spoiler this year to a couple teams. They've been a tough play. Very impressive season from the Commodores, the Vanderbilt Commodores. They've been pretty impressive this year. Regardless, I think Tennessee should go ahead and roll here, -10. There's just so much at stake for the Volunteers, and this is a really good Tennessee team, regardless of what some people might say. I just don't think Vanderbilt's defense will be able to keep up with Tennessee's offense. This is a top 10 rushing offense in college football. Vanderbilt is 35th against the run, 38th overall in scoring against a top 15 scoring offense in college football. And on the flip side of that, the bigger matchup or the bigger advantage Tennessee has here is their defense against Vanderbilt's offense. Vanderbilt overall are 76th in scoring, 84th in rushing, 109th in passing. Tennessee top 30 in both passing yards and rushing yards, top 5 scoring defense in college football. Their strength of schedule is not very great, although they do obviously have a couple big games in there, playing Georgia, Alabama, Florida, Oklahoma. They have a couple tough games. I just don't see how Vanderbilt keeps this one close. There's so much at stake for Tennessee. They need to win. They kind of need to win big to build their resume up a little bit. So I like Tennessee here, -10. Next up, guys, our second pick in this week's slate, we have the big game. We got Ohio State, Michigan. Now, normally in other years, this would be a much bigger matchup, and in the past few years, it's been a really big matchup. This year, it doesn't have the same gravity, the same weight, because Michigan's just not Michigan anymore, at least not this year. I mean, the first year post-Harbaugh, we knew there'd be a little bit of drop-off, but Michigan this year, 6-5 overall. They are bowl eligible, but a really disappointing season from the Wolverines. I love Ohio State here, -19.5. Michigan has dominated this series of late. The last couple of Harbaugh years, they've embarrassed Ohio State. I think it's payback time. I think Ohio State, this is obviously, everybody, the coaches, the fans, obviously the fans, the players, they take this rivalry very seriously. Ohio State, Ryan Day, they have not forgotten the last couple of years. I think they're going to lay a beat down here on Michigan. I love them -9, and especially they're at home too. Give me Ohio State -19.5 here. This Michigan team is just not very good. Ohio State's on their road for a Big Ten championship here, obviously fighting for one of those top 4 seeds in the college football playoff. There's a top 10 offense in the nation and also a top 10 defense, the number 1 scoring defense in the nation. I just don't see how Michigan scores points in this game. So give me Ohio State here, minus 19.5. Ohio State's actually covered this spread in 73% of their games this year, and they've been battle tested. Sorry to all the Michigan fans out there, but I think Ohio State absolutely whoops your ass today. Like I said, this is a payback for Ryan Day and the Buckeyes. All right, guys, next up we have Kansas at Baylor, 12 p.m. kickoff today. I'm going with Kansas here, -1, which is actually pretty good value here, -105 odds here on DraftKings. Kansas has been on quite a run here after kind of a rough start to the year. The Jayhawks have been really, really solid of late. They need this win to be bowl eligible, and you're going to hear that throughout this video. A lot of these games really comes down to motivation. I know some people might think that's a stupid reason to pick a game, but it does matter. Kansas needs this win in order to be bowl eligible. Baylor, the win helps what bowl seed or what bowl game they're going to get into, but they're already bowl eligible regardless. It's just hard for me to fade Kansas with the way they've been playing of late. They crushed Colorado last week, 37-21. We obviously had the Buffaloes -2.5 last week. That was a pretty bad beat on our part, but overall, they've been crushing it. I mean, against the spread over the last 5 games, you see really good numbers. And these are massive, massive performances. They beat Colorado, which was ranked 16th at the time. They beat BYU, who was obviously one of the top 20 teams in college football at the time. They beat they beat Iowa State. They lost to Kansas State, but they gave them a hell of a challenge. They crushed Houston. They hung in there with Arizona State. It's been a really impressive run for Kansas, and they're playing a Baylor team here that just doesn't do it for me. They're not a bad team by any means, and they also have some decent wins on their resume, but I think the way that Kansas has played of late, the teams they're playing, I just think Kansas can go ahead and get job done. Look at the record versus common opponents here on the right side of the screen. I mean, Kansas, a lot of teams that Baylor lost to, Kansas went ahead and beat straight up. I mean, they beat Colorado. They beat BYU. They beat down Iowa State 45-36. Iowa State crushed Baylor 43-21. It's going to be a close one. This is a Big 12 battle here, but I think Kansas is the team to go ahead and back to keep riding the hot hand here. The Jayhawks have been really impressive over the last month. I'm going to keep riding them here. I think they're going to get bowl eligible with the win here. So give me Kansas -1. All right, guys, next up we got South Carolina at Clemson, 12 p.m. kickoff. I'm going with the Gamecocks here, +3.5 on the road in Death Valley against the Clemson Tigers. South Carolina has been incredibly impressive this year with some really decent wins on their resume. Obviously, they beat Oklahoma on the road. They beat A&M at home, Missouri at home. And even when they've lost, they've been very impressive in their loss. The only bad loss they've really had on the year was that Ole Miss loss back on October 5th. They got blown out in that one. But besides that one, I mean, they hung tight with LSU. They lost by 3 in that one. They lost by 2 to Bama. They beat down Kentucky. I mean, they've been a pretty impressive team all season long. As a 3-loss team, they're probably out of it. I don't think they're a playoff team, but you never know. I mean, that if they win, normally you would think a 3-loss team probably couldn't make. Now, this is the first year we've had a 12-team playoff, but you would think that a 3-loss team couldn't make the playoffs. You never know. South Carolina's resume is pretty impressive. I don't think they're going to make it, but if they do win, it gives them a chance. A slim chance, but a chance nonetheless. So you're telling me there's a chance. They beat Clemson here as a very big resume builder for them. Another big ranked win for them could do wonders for their chances. For Clemson, they obviously are in a similar situation where if they win, I don't know if they're necessarily 100% in, but definitely better odds than if they lose this game. If Clemson loses, they definitely aren't going to the playoff here as a 3-loss team. Their resume just is not good enough. Tied for 106th in strength of schedule, where South Carolina is 51st in strength of schedule. South Carolina also tied for 31st strength of victory, where Clemson is 79th. So kind of a big, if Clemson wins this game, it's a big resume builder for them. So it kind of is a situation where you win if you're Clemson, you're at least going for a chance to win an ACC championship, probably against Miami. I do like South Carolina here +3.5, though. I think this game is going to be a tight one. I'm not necessarily saying South Carolina will go out and win this game outright, but I like them at the +3.5 line. This game is going to be close. Clemson has not played the toughest of schedule. They haven't been battle testing the way that South Carolina has. Besides Clemson's Week 1 loss against the Georgia Bulldogs, post that, their toughest battles, I mean, maybe you could say Louisville. That's probably the toughest one they've had. Like I said, they really have not been battle tested. It's been a pretty weak schedule all the way through, and it makes sense why Clemson has dominated all the way through. Of course, except for the Louisville game where they obviously lost that one. So the 2 games they played this year where they've actually had tough opponents being Louisville and Georgia, they both lost those games by double-digit losses. South Carolina is battle-tested as all hell. The Gamecocks are also 5-0 against the spread in their last 5 games on the road. A little insight provided by Outlier there. They are a top 50 defense and a top 50 offense. Defensively, South Carolina 14th in scoring. Like I said, top 50 on offense, top 50 on defense. Their offense is definitely the weaker side of this team. However, Clemson's defense is nothing to write home about either. Tied for 39th in scoring, outside the top 50 in both passing yards and rushing yards allowed per game. So South Carolina, I think they can hang around here and keep this game close, maybe upset. You want to sprinkle a little something on money line, you could take that chance, but I think South Carolina plus 3.5 is a really good bet here. All right, guys, next up we got Louisville at Kentucky, 12 p.m. kickoff on Saturday. This is one of those instances where one team is still playing for something, the other team is really not playing for anything at all. Kentucky is 4-7 on the year. They are not bowl eligible regardless if they win this game or lose. This is the end of Kentucky's season right here. Their season finishes here at home in Lexington against the Louisville Cardinals. Now, Louisville, win or lose, they're going to play in a bowl game. However, this game could determine where they play, what kind of bowl game they play in. So there is still something at stake here for Louisville in this matchup. And these are two teams that are both incredibly battle-tested, so you can't really make the argument that one has had a tougher schedule than the other. Louisville is actually tied for 8th in terms of strength of schedule, Kentucky 23rd. And it's unfortunate for Louisville because they have played well even against these top teams, right? Notre Dame, they hang in there. They lose by 7. They beat Georgia Tech, who's been on a really good run. They almost beat Georgia in overtime last night. They lose to SMU by a touchdown. They lose to Miami by a touchdown. Even when they've lost these games incredibly tight. And then, of course, they obviously beat Clemson at Clemson by double digits. So a pretty impressive season for Louisville. For Kentucky, again, they played a really tough schedule as well. They beat Ole Miss. Pretty impressive win on their resume. They hung in there with Georgia, only lost by 1 against Georgia at home. So some pretty impressive performances there for Kentucky as well. However, I do like Louisville here, -4. I just think there's so much more to play for Louisville in this game for a Kentucky team that this is kind of the end of the road for them. The one area where Louisville is kind of weak is defensive. They're 59th in scoring. However, Kentucky's offense is abysmal. I just don't see how Kentucky's offense will be able to score points on this Louisville defense. Tied for 113th in scoring offense. They are 110th in passing yards, 81st in rushing yards. Louisville, they are not a great pass defensive team, but again, you're going up against a passing offense that's not very good either. They are still top 50 in rushing defense as well. Like I said, Louisville, their weakness is definitely their defense, but this is not an offense that will take advantage of said weakness. On the flip side here, Louisville, they are a top 20 scoring offense in the nation. Now, Kentucky's defense is pretty solid. However, their pass defense is 27th, whereas Louisville's passing offense is tied for 13th. So there's a little advantage there. This team doesn't turn over the ball much. Really good offensive line play for Louisville. I think Louisville should be able to go ahead and get the win here in Lexington, -4. All right, guys, next up we got Duke at Wake Forest, 12 p.m. kickoff. I'm going with Duke here, -3 on the road. Again, Wake Forest, a 4-win team. They are not bowl eligible regardless if they win this game or not. And that doesn't always matter, right? These teams can still, if anything, sometimes it could be the opposite where these teams are looking at this like, hey, this is our last game. This is the last thing we have to play for. Let's go all out and win. I just want to say that I don't want people to think I'm just taking these picks because they're not bowl eligible. That's not what I'm doing. I just think that sometimes there is, depending on the strength of the team and the extra motivation, I do think it does play a factor here. Duke is solid. Obviously, they are already bowl eligible, but a win here puts them 9-3, could put them in the top 25 potentially, gives them a better bowl game, which obviously could help with recruiting and whatnot. But all in all, I just think it's a solid matchup for a Blue Devils team that has been pretty solid all season long. This is a top 50 scoring defense in the nation. They're 33rd against the pass, which is where Wake Forest has their strength. They are 49th in passing offense. Duke is a top 40 passing defense. Duke's rushing defense not great, but neither is Wake Forest's rushing offense. Duke is tied for 12th in yards per play. They force a ton of turnovers and a really solid pass rush. Going against a Wake Forest team that turns the ball over a ton. They do not have a very good offensive line. This Duke defense should eat against Wake Forest. On the flip side here, Duke offensively, we know they're not great, but Wake Forest's defense is not very good either. And there's a clear advantage here. Duke 46th in passing yards. Wake Forest 131st in passing yards allowed. There's a clear advantage there. I think Duke's defense is good enough to stymie Wake Forest offense, which is not very good to begin with. And on the flip side, Duke's offense, although it's not great, I think it's just good enough to take advantage of some of the weaknesses in Wake Forest's defense. So give me Duke here, -3 on the road. All right, guys, now moving to the 3:30 p.m. slate. We got Miami and Syracuse. We're going with the over here, 66.5 in this one. I was leaning on taking Syracuse on the spread, but Miami, this team is very unpredictable. The one thing we can predict, however, is they're going to score some points. Miami is the #1 scoring offense in college football. We know they've been really good. This is the second best passing offense. Not a great running team, but really solid passing team. First in yards per play. Cam Ward has worked his way into maybe being the #1 overall pick in the NFL draft in Heisman territory for sure. So really impressive year from this Miami offense. They're super inconsistent, but in a lot of close games, but I do think Miami should be able to put up a decent amount of points on Syracuse, which defensively, they're tied for 86th in scoring, 44th against the pass, 76th against the run, 95th in yards per play. They don't force many turnovers. So yeah, I think that this should be a solid performance here for Miami. And on the flip side, now Syracuse is not a great offense. However, this is actually, from a statistical standpoint, the number one passing offense in college football, believe it or not. Now, obviously, there's a schedule discrepancy there, of course. But Syracuse averaging 361 passing yards per game this year. Miami 34th in pass defense. They're a solid pass defense, but Syracuse passing offense has been so good, they should be able to at least move the ball and contribute a little bit to the total. And although overall on the year you see the unders have been hitting more consistently for Syracuse, over the last few games you're seeing some more highly scoring matchups. You see over, under, and a push. So they're 2-1-1 on the regular over line over the last month. So you see some more higher scoring games coming from them. And in Miami, again, the under has cashed the majority of the year. However, that's mainly because the lines are usually so high. We've seen some pretty high scoring Miami games, 97 total against Louisville, 77 against Cal, 72 against Virginia Tech. They've cashed this over, I just say 36% hit rate overall this year. However, look at the overall line, right? Over, push, over. Now, the last month you've seen a couple more unders here because they played some better defensive teams like Georgia Tech, like Duke, although the over did hit in that Duke game. So although the data at this 66.5 line may not be great, overall, Miami has been an over team most of the year. And Syracuse, it's been more of the opposite. But again, over the last month, you're seeing the over hit more consistently. Next up, guys, we have the Iron Bowl. Auburn at Alabama, 3:30 p.m. kickoff. I'm going with the Auburn Tigers here, plus 11.5 in Tuscaloosa. I am just not sold at all on this Alabama team at all. That loss versus Oklahoma last week was awful. Alabama fans have a right to be upset. This team, even in some of their wins, they have the Missouri win in their back pocket. The LSU win was impressive, but losing Tennessee, they should have lost to South Carolina. They almost blew it against Georgia. So this Alabama team's been a little bit of a frustrating season. Obviously, some people are talking about if they win this game and they win it convincingly with a 9-win team, depending on how some of the other games shake out, maybe Alabama still has a shot. I know there's obviously some Alabama bias, of course. I think their season's probably over in terms of a college football playoff standpoint, even if they win this game. Unless they win by like 45 and a lot of other crazy stuff happens, maybe some big upsets happen, I think a 3-loss Bama team is going to be really tough for them to make it in. But never say never. There is still a small chance. So this obviously there is something to play for here for Alabama. But make no mistake, this is a big rivalry game. Auburn loves to play spoiler against Auburn loves to play spoiler against Bama. And again, something to play for here. Auburn, they need this game to be bowl eligible. They win this game, they get the 6 wins, they're officially bowl eligible. So there is something definitely at stake here for the Tigers as well. And give credit, Auburn's had a pretty good season. I know their record doesn't reflect it, but they've had a pretty tough schedule, and they've stood tall in a lot of these matchups. Auburn's also coming off a bye week, a really well-placed bye week for Auburn. They beat Texas A&M last game out at home, a really massive win for the Tigers. It's unfortunate because they've hung tight in a lot of these games, right? They gave Oklahoma a good challenge. They gave Missouri a good challenge. They obviously beat Kentucky on the road. The key thing to look at, though, Auburn has not been blown out much this year. They've covered the spread of plus 11.5 in every game this year except for the Georgia game. And the insights provided by Outlier, the Auburn Tigers are 4-1 against the spread in their last 5 games on the road. So this is a pretty solid road team in terms of covering the number. Auburn doesn't get blown out very much. Again, only once this year have they lost by this number. They failed to cover the over of plus 11.5, that one game against Georgia. So that's their only miss this year. And look at Alabama. Overall, they're 56% hit rate on the year, but at this line, 55%. Make no mistake, I do think that Bama wins this game, but I think it's going to be a lot tighter than people might think. I think Auburn should be able to keep this game relatively close. I just don't trust this Bama team this year. I think Auburn's defense can disrupt them a little bit. The key thing to know, Auburn is 21st in run defense, a pretty solid run defensive team. And Alabama, that's kind of been their strength offensively, is their running attack. I think Auburn should be able to slow them down, force Jalen Monroe to throw the ball a little bit more. Like I said, end of the day, Alabama probably wins this game at home, but I think Auburn should be able to keep this within this number of 11.5. So give me the Tigers here, plus 11.5. Next up, my Notre Dame Fighting Irish. You call it Irish bias, whatever, but they've covered the number at an incredible rate this year. They're at 80% against the spread this year. They've been a cover darling, 91% on this line of minus 6.5. The only game, and of course the game that's been haunting us all season long, is that Northern Illinois game. This team has been a cover machine this season, and the situation is very simple. Win, and you're in. Notre Dame wins this game. They're on the road to the college football playoff. If they lose this game, they could still maybe make it, but I would wager they're probably not because their strength of schedule is pretty weak overall. Notre Dame's a juggernaut right now, and I just don't think USC is going to be able to hang tight. 6.5, keep it with this game within a touchdown. I just don't see it. USC, they're having an okay season. They're 6-5 overall. It's nothing really to look at. But they have a couple impressive games. Like they hung with Penn State here. They kept that game relatively close. But they lose to teams like Maryland. They lost to Washington. Like those are losses against teams that are also like kind of average, right? Washington, they're not really having a great year. Maryland's a 4-win team. They lost to Michigan. Michigan's not, again, they're a 6-win team. But they do have some nice wins. Again, they beat LSU. Wisconsin they beat. They hung in there with Penn State. They beat Nebraska. Overall, I just don't see how USC, though, is going to be able to hang with the Irish here. Notre Dame, there's a top 10 offense, top 10 defense in the nation's second scoring defense in college football. First against the pass, 40th against the rush. USC, their big strength is their passing offense. This is the best pass defense in college football. Great pass rush. They forced a ton of turnovers here. On the flip side here, USC, their defense is definitely better than it was last year, but still not very good. And Notre Dame, a top 10 rushing offense in the nation, 6th in scoring overall. I think Notre Dame should be able to win this game. I think they should win by more than a touchdown, but they're going to be able to at least keep this game within that number. We are more than halfway through the picks here, guys. If you're still watching at this point in the video, thank you very much as always for watching. Please comment 20 down below if you are still watching. Put a lot of work into each and every video here on the channel, so those who do watch all the way through, we appreciate you. Comment 20 down below if you're still watching today's video. Next up, guys, we got Indiana, Purdue, 7 p.m. kickoff. Actually, I think we might have skipped a couple games here. Yeah, we're going to have to go backwards in time here, but we're already on this pick, so we'll just stick with it for now. We have Indiana, Purdue, 7 p.m. kickoff. We're going with Indiana. We're going with the Hoosiers here, minus 28.5. They lost to Ohio State last week, but let's not act like Indiana hasn't had an incredible year. And because of the way some things have shaken out, despite, obviously, we know their strength of schedule is not great and all that stuff, their strength of victory is not great either. Indiana is 78th for strength of victory, 115th in strength of schedule. So obviously, Purdue's actually had a really tough schedule in comparison to Indiana. But I like the Hoosiers here, minus 20.5. Purdue is an awful team. They're 1-10. This team is really, really, really bad. The Purdue's Boilermakers are 0-5 against the spread in the last 5 games versus top 25 scoring defenses. You can feel Cignetti was really pissed off with how this team played against Ohio State last week. Obviously, they didn't just lose. They got blown out in that game. I do think this is a big bounce-back spot for Indiana. Obviously, they win, and they still have a chance to make the college football playoff here. And I just don't see where Purdue is going to do anything here. They're 129th in scoring. It's a top 10 scoring defense. They're first against the run, 25th against the pass. On the flip side here, Purdue's 129th in scoring defense. This is the second best scoring offense in college football. And their numbers, 37th in passing, 61st in rushing. Not exactly that impressive, but again, Purdue is outside the top 100 in both rushing and passing yards allowed. So really, really good matchup for Indiana. I think Curt Cignetti and this team will have some frustration and absolutely demolish Purdue in this spot. They've covered the spread an 80% hit rate overall this year. The Hoosiers have. And even with this line of 28.5, which is a really high line, they've actually covered at a 45% hit rate, which is pretty good, impressive considering this is a 28.5 point line. So I think Indiana's going to have a really big bounce back spot here. All right, traveling back in time now, guys. Our next pickup is Missouri, Arkansas, 3:30 p.m. kickoff. I'm going Missouri here, -3. They have dominated this rivalry against Arkansas over the last few years, especially when it's at home here when Missouri hosts this game. I know the Tigers have had a little bit of a disappointing season when a lot of people thought maybe this is a playoff team potentially, but this is still a solid Missouri team. They're 60% against the spread, 64% on this line of -3, and they have clear advantages on both sides of the ball. I know their offense has not been as potent as it was last year, 55th in scoring, but Arkansas, clear weakness here on their passing defense, 112, tied for 112th in the nation. Missouri, not a great passing offense, tied for 72nd at 224.6, but they should be able to have some success airing it out here on this Arkansas defense. They don't force a lot of turnovers. Missouri's very clean with the football this year, which is a very big advantage here. And on the flip side here, Missouri's defense versus Arkansas's offense, the one big problem with Arkansas has been the fact that their offense, it's solid, but it's not the best. 45th in scoring. They are top 50 in both passing and rushing yards, but so isn't Missouri's defense. And the one area where Arkansas has been really strong is their passing offense. Missouri, their best strength on defense is their passing defense. This team is 4th in third down conversion, 5th in first downs. They are tied 52nd in yards per play. And not a great pass rush, but this is a really bad Arkansas offensive line. I think Missouri, it's going to be a close one, but I think Missouri -3 is the right play here at home. Again, pretty good record of late against Arkansas. The last time these two teams played last season, they crushed them 48-14. Again, Missouri was a much better team, I think, last year compared to this year, but very big win, and that was on the road. Missouri's also 6-3 against the spread in their last 9 games at home. So pretty good numbers here. We're going to go with the Tigers here, -3. All right, guys, our last of the 3:30 games, we have Penn State, Maryland. And again, this is just what James Franklin does. When he plays teams like this, he crushes them. -24.5 here from -110. Obviously, Penn State, they win. They're probably in the college football playoff. But they need to win pretty big, I think, for resume building purposes. 50% cover against the spread this year for Penn State. Only 27% on this line. However, this line obviously have -24.5. It is a big one. Maryland's not bowl eligible. They have nothing really to play for in this game except for maybe pride. This team's just not good offensively. 91st in scoring offense. Now, they actually have a pretty solid passing attack, 12th in passing yards, but this team cannot run the football. Penn State, in whatever metric you want to look at, they're top 10 in the nation. 8th in yards per play, 8th in rushing yards allowed, tied for 9th in passing yards allowed. Any metric you really want to look at, they're really efficient in the red zone. Pass rush is solid enough. I mean, like I said, any area you want to look at, Penn State's defense is really good. And on the flip side here, Maryland's defense is awful. Tied 95th again. Love saying 95th, apparently. Tied for 95th. Fifth, proper English here, folks. 95th in scoring, 109th in passing yards, 42nd in rushing. Penn State top 50 in both those categories. It's just, again, James Franklin loves to do this. He loves to crush these teams like Maryland. So it's a resume builder. Penn State, like I said, as long as they win, they should be in the playoff. They're 101st strength of schedule, 64th in strength of victory. So they kind of need this win for a resume builder. They need to win it pretty convincingly. So I like Penn State here, minus 24.5 at home. All right, guys, next up we got Oregon, Washington, 7:30 p.m. kickoff. We're going with the Ducks here, minus 17.5. A lot of people may look at this game like, hey, it's a look-ahead spot. Oregon really doesn't need to care. They're undefeated. They're going to the playoff. It looks like they've already got a couple nice wins on the resume. The Ohio State win obviously being the big one. But if you don't think Oregon, Dan Lanning's kind of crazy. If you don't think this game means something to him, it definitely does. They've actually covered this spread of minus 17.5 in 64% of their games this year. The big advantage for Oregon here now, actually, Washington's defense has been pretty solid this year. They're actually top 30 in scoring defense, tied for 5th against the pass. Their run defense could use some work, but overall, the numbers are okay at least for Washington. They have some advantages on the defensive side of the football. Oregon, we know they're a solid offense. But the one area and the reason why I think Oregon wins this game is I just don't see how Washington scores enough points. This is one of the best defenses in college football, 8th in scoring. They're top 10 against the pass, 29th against the run. And Washington's offense tied for 109th there. I just don't see Washington scoring enough points to keep this number close. And Dan Lanning's kind of crazy. Rivalry game. Obviously, we know they had some stuff last year. Oregon obviously got the last laugh. Well, in terms of this year, I should say, they actually lost both games last year. Pac-12 championship game and the regular season game. Oregon lost both of those games against Washington. Washington on the road to losing in the national title game. But yeah, losing both those games last year, you can tell Dan Lanning, I think he's going to want some vengeance in this one here, losing both those games. So I think Oregon should go ahead and get some revenge at home here, minus 17. I think he's going to keep the foot on the gas here on this one. So give me the Ducks here, minus 17.5. Next up, guys, we have the Brian Kelly saving his job game. LSU, Oklahoma, 7 p.m. kickoff. I'm going with the Tigers here, minus 6. I know LSU, a very disappointing year from LSU. They did beat Vanderbilt last week, a nice little bounce back win after an embarrassing loss at Florida. But yeah, really rough run here for LSU. And Oklahoma obviously coming off their big upset win. They crushed Alabama last week. This feels like a bit of a letdown spot here for Oklahoma coming off their big win. LSU, obviously, this is, again, I said it for a reason. This is the Brian Kelly save your job game. He needs this one. If they lose this game, there's a very good chance LSU could fire him after this. Truth be told, I just don't see how Oklahoma's going to score enough offensively on this LSU defense, which is crazy to say considering last year how bad this LSU defense was. They're not great again this year, but Oklahoma's offense has been pretty abysmal. 121st in passing yards, 75th in rushing yards, 127th in yards per play. This is just not a good Oklahoma offense. And LSU's defense isn't great, but it's good enough to at least keep up with those numbers. On the flip side, Oklahoma, really solid defensive team. However, LSU has a clear advantage. They're 8th in passing yards. Oklahoma 48th in passing yards allowed. Again, I think LSU, they're going to be a little bit extra motivated in this one here. At least on Brian Kelly's side of things, he definitely should be. It's going to be a tight one. It's kind of I know a lot of people are going to hate this pick, but I just have a feeling here. I like LSU here, minus 6. All right, guys, 2 picks left in today's video. We got Texas at Texas A&M, 7:30 p.m. kickoff. I'm going with the A&M Aggies here, plus 6.5 at home against the Longhorns. Not a great cover. Texas A&M actually not been a cover team at all this year. However, at this line of plus 6.5, an 82% hit rate this year. Only 2 times this year have they failed to cover this line, versus South Carolina and versus Notre Dame. It's not very often when they lose by more than a touchdown, and they've had some pretty impressive games on their resume where they've either won or if they lost, they kept it relatively close. I think Texas wins this game, but on the road here, A&M is definitely a tough team. You know, let's not. I know they're probably not. They're not making the playoffs. Not probably. They're not making the playoffs, but A&M is battle tested. They've had some really tough games on the schedule. They're at home here, a tough place to play. And I don't know, I just kind of feel like this could be a look ahead spot for Texas. This is, Texas, they're a 1-loss team with some nice wins on the resume, especially considering the rest of the SEC. Looking at how that schedule has gone. Now, they obviously had the Georgia loss in their back pocket, which is not very good. You could argue Texas needs this game, but I think even if the Longhorns were to lose this one, as a 2-loss team, they still have a pretty good shot of making the playoffs. Their eyes are on the SEC championship and whatnot. I still think Texas wins this game, but I think them winning by more than a touchdown, I just don't know. On the road, tough environment, nighttime game. A&M's defense is really solid offensively. They're just good enough to at least keep this game within reason. Again, I'm not saying A&M's going to win, but keep it within the number. Plus 6.5 seems like the right play to me in this game. It feels like there's a little bit of a letdown spot for the Longhorns. In our 16th and final pick in today's video, we're going Kansas State at Iowa State, 7:30 p.m. kickoff. We're going with Kansas State, the Wildcats here, +3 on the road. I like Kansas State a lot in this matchup. This is going to be a really close game. Both teams have clear advantages here on both sides of the ball. On offense, Kansas State, they're actually they're tied for 33rd in scoring, top 50 scoring defense in the nation. Iowa State, their offense is fine. It's not great. They are 44th right now in scoring. So it is top 50 offense in college football. Their big strength is their passing offense, 26th in passing yards. Kansas State's defense, 89th in passing yards allowed. But on the flip side, though, Kansas State, they are a top 15 rushing offense. Iowa State, 100th in rushing defense. So a clear advantage there for Kansas State's offense. A really solid matchup. Both teams are even. They're both top 50 on both sides of the ball. Iowa State top 50 in both defense and offense. Kansas State top 50 in both defense and offense. These teams are pretty even with a couple of key advantages here for both sides. It's a coin flip game, and in a coin flip game, I tend to side with the underdog here. Kansas State has covered the spread of +3 in 73% of the games this year. Not very often. Only 3 times this year they've lost by more than 3. Those games were to BYU, Arizona State, and Houston. Some pretty good teams there they've lost to. On the Iowa State side, they covered the spread of -3 in 55% of their games this season. Iowa State, for me, are just kind of trending in the opposite direction of what you'd like to see. You know, they lost to Texas Tech. They lose to Kansas. Now, they did bounce back and they beat Cincinnati before narrowly beating Utah last week. I just think Iowa State, after a really strong start to the year, over the last month or so, you're seeing, they beat UCF, but it was a really close game. Again, you have a couple of those losses there versus Texas Tech and Kansas, and a close game with Utah here. Kansas State, on the flip side, you could argue the same. They've lost 2 of their last 3 games, but they crushed Cincinnati last week. They beat Kansas. They beat West Virginia. Narrow loss versus Colorado, but they do go ahead and beat Oklahoma State. And they did cover the spread. At least they pushed, I should say, against Colorado. I just think Kansas State should be able to keep this game close. I kind of like the money line here, but I'll play it safe and take them with the points. I just think it's going to be a really close game. I think it's going to be a field goal game, and Kansas State +3 seems like the right bet to make. All right, guys, that's all 16 picks in this week's college football slate. Thank you very much, as always, for watching. One more time, guys, please make sure to go ahead and hit the subscribe button, hit that like button, and drop a comment down below. I'll be back next week with some more college football more college football bets. Conference championships coming soon. We got playoffs on the horizon. Some really great football still to go. Bowl seasons on the horizon. A lot of great football left in the season. However, this is the end of the regular season. Thank you to all those who have watched all season long. But like I said, there's plenty more football to go around, guys. We'll see you next week. Until then, hope you're all winners.